Right, okay, the meeting is now recording. So please let me know if it stops recording for any reason. And right, we'll get going. So I think everyone can see the screen, right? So in the chat, if there's a problem with recording or if you can't see anything in particular, just let me know and we'll get going. So here, this is hopefully what we achieved to do by the end of the session. It may look quite sort of intimidating, but no worries at all. The steps are much simpler than we sort of need to think. It's really powerful the way we can do this. So we'll start off by going over the basics of how to make the mesh. So last week we made our pencil cup and our pencils, and we're using the exact same techniques, just in slightly different ways, and adding on it a little bit as well, of course, to make our sort of more complex rocket shape. And then after that, we can add materials. So this is how we make it look purple or yellow, and we add the metallic look to the engine, for example, or make the windows look reflective. And also we can sort of assign these elements to make this a little checkable pattern. So let's see how far we get. So first of all, let me open up my proper folder. Here we go. So this is where we start. This is where we got to last week. So we've our cool little pencil cup. And first of all, we covered how to do collections. So first of all, we want to keep this all in the same file because we'll be making our composite scene later. So if we keep this all nice and in one Blender file, it will make our lives a bit easier later on. So over here, let me make sure I've got my keys turned on. I think I do. Yes. Okay, brilliant. Oh no, there we go. There we go. Right. We can, first of all, we can just check this little box here by the pencils, and we can just sort of temporarily hide them from our view. So now it gives us a nice clean workspace to work from. So, okay, first of all, we'll need to make the shape of our rocket. And, right, so how do we think we should do this? So we should always do it in the way that sort of makes our life the easiest. So what we can do is, which is a sort of a nice, it's about the right shape we want. And again, we don't want to add too much detail at this stage because in general, the less detail you have at the start, it's much easier to work with. So we could do a sort of really detailed sphere here, but it makes our life a lot harder down the line. So let's try. So we can change the properties here. So we can change the number of segments on our sphere and the number of rings. And I think this is a good amount of detail to start off with. We can also sort of, if we check the pencils again, we can sort of scale this to be roughly correct. So I think we've got sort of a giant set of pencils here, but it's okay. We can change everything later. But just so we're sort of a bit more satisfied with the scaling, we can just make it, I think about that should be fine. Just so it's a bit easier later on. But okay, brilliant. So we have our shape here, and how do we want to do this? So our rocket, it's like one of the sort of classic, like retro-looking rockets, right? So I think if we make it a sort of like the shape of a rugby ball or an American football, sort of a pointy egg, I think that works quite well. And at this stage, this is the point where you can sort of have total freedom over it. This is just how I particularly found it. It looks quite cool doing this way, but feel absolutely free if you want to do absolutely anything else as well. So, right, if you remember last time, here is our object, and these are the little vertices, and we can switch between this mode, which is the object mode, and the edit mode like this, where we can click the individual points with tab. And okay, we also covered the proportional editing tool, which you can click up here, or you can press O, and this lets us move all the vertices around a point as well in a proportional manner, and we can get some really cool sort of smooth effects. So okay, let's begin to stretch this out. So we can use the G key. If you remember that, grab something, and this adds this little wheel, which we can use to sort of change the radius with which it grabs. So, okay, I think probably about that is good. And then when we can hit the Z, X, and Y keys as well to change the axes. So if we hit the Z key, we can get it moving in the X axis. And I think something like that could be good. And we can, something like that, yeah. So that's definitely an egg shape. And then if we sort of do the same thing, but for the bottom, grab it out. So like this, maybe a bit longer. Again, this is just personally how I found it looked quite cool, but feel absolutely free to do it any way you want. So I think that's good. That's a good sort of a rugby ball shape, if you like. So okay. We also want to make this smooth, as we don't. So we could do a flat rocket. In this case, we want it smooth, and we can add some detail to it later as well. But okay. So what else? What else does a rocket have? It needs engine, of course, which we'll do in a second. But it also has those fins, you know, the sort of stabilizing fins around the side of it. Let's see if we can add some of those. So, okay, just to make this a bit easier, let's grab this and move it up a bit. Okay. Actually, you know what? Let's make this smooth now. So if we go over on the outliner here, this is where you see all the properties of this object which we have selected. So if we click on this one again, the little spanner, we can see the modifiers. Currently there aren't any, but we can add one, and we can add a subdivision surface. And I think, as Christy was explaining last time, this basically, for every face you have, it splits it into smaller faces, and so it has the effect of getting a much smoother, nicer surface. And in fact, if we shade flat, you can see much more effectively what's going on here. So you can see it's making these. So before, if we didn't have it, you can see we've got quite big, chunky faces. But if we add the subdivision, it splits them up, and then we can change this to get even smoother surface. We don't need to go too wild on this. I think that should be fine. And then again, especially if we add the shade smooth, it looks really nice and sort of smooth now. Okay, actually, you know what? I'm going to make this slightly pointier at the top as well. So again, grab, need proportional editing, maybe change the scroll wheel a bit. That's big too. Okay, we can also change this. So this is the fall off of the proportional editing tool. So it's basically how it affects the sort of the points around it. So currently it's set on smooth, but these are all different modes you can do, and you can play around with this. So for example, we put it on constant. You can see that it's literally changing it as a constant. So it's grabbing every point within a little radius. We can change it to sphere, which also has a different effect. So you can see it's sort of changing in a slightly different manner. I think the one that looked quite nice was sharp. Yeah, there we go. So it's a bit pointier now. There we go. It's good now. Yeah. Okay. Right. Let's add these fins. So to get the fins, let us first of all add a new object. So if we click out of our main rocket body, we can do Shift A, so add. And the way I like to do this, I think if we add a plane, so this is just a flat square, we can then grab this with G and just move it off to the side, just for now. And then if we want to make it sort of rotated, so it's pointing the correct way. So if we hit R for rotate, then Y to rotate it around the Y axis, and then we can type in 90 to make it go 90 degrees. So now it's perfectly aligned, so it's just brilliant. And now what we do, this is where we can use the perspective view keys. So if we hit the 1 key, we can see it swaps to this view. This is not quite the one I want. It's 3. There we go. And you can also press the Alt key on your keyboard and the middle mouse button to sort of snap between the different views like this, which is quite useful. And we like this view just because it makes it a lot easier to see what's going on. So okay, let's make the sort of the fin shape. So we can do 4 fins around the rocket. But first of all, let's just make one of them. So we go into edit mode again. Now, I think actually, first of all, let's move it up a bit. All right, so I think that's a good base there for the sort of, that's a good size for the fin. See if we can scale this. Oh, turn it off proportional editing. And we just grab this here. If we want to sort of make it curved slightly. So maybe like this, and we can rotate it as well. And I think like this might be good. And now what we can do is, having this edge selected or the 2 points around it, we can hit E for extrude, and this will give us another face with these dimensions, and we can just basically repeat this process. So we can sort of grab this in here. I think that's good. Then we can extrude again, and we can move this, maybe move that a bit there, and then we can extrude. In fact, probably move that in. But there we go. That's a bit better. Actually start scaling this down a bit as well, and again, this is completely subjective. Make whatever rocket fin you feel like. So here we go. So getting to the end now. Don't want to make it too pointy. think that might not be bad. And then you can sort of compare it to this. Do you think that looks good? I don't know. I think maybe one more. See how this looks. No, I think the other one looks. So if we don't like it, we can press Control Z, and we can undo all the actions we've just done. So I think that's about good. We don't need to go too far with it. So, okay, let's now just compare the size. Okay, I think there's a bit. Okay, it's definitely a bit small. So we can scale, and that's a bit too big. Yeah, something like that maybe. And in fact, I know I said I wouldn't do it, but I'm gonna change this again. There we go. I think that's better, and the same for the top. So that portion, just make it a bit pointier. There we go, because we want it to be slightly pointy. Brilliant. So we've got our fin, and in fact, actually, if we so okay, this is another useful hotkey. So if we press Alt and Z, this goes into X-ray mode, and this lets us see through all of these surfaces. And so it can let us see through this, and we can sort of line this up a little bit easier. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically jamming this fin into the main bit of the rocket. And we don't want any sort of, we obviously want this to sort of not have a gap here. So we can extrude this again. And maybe sort of neaten up a little bit like this. Okay, that's not very good. But okay, we won't really be able to see this again. So we can press, go out of X-ray mode. And something like this. Okay, that's good. Okay, before we copy it around, we need to make sure it's actually got a thickness, because currently it's just a flat object. So we can, again, this is where X-ray mode is really helpful. We can pick all of our faces. So you can either go into press 3 to go in the face view mode, or you can just select all of the points. And then we press E for extrude. And now this lets us extrude a whole set of faces here. And I think something like that. And we can just go out of X-ray mode to make it be easier to see. Yeah, I think that's about the right thickness. And in fact, we can check from the top with number pad 7. We can now line this up a little bit better, although we will be copying over. So there we go, something like that. All right, brilliant. So how do we copy this around? Well, there's a few ways we can do it. The sort of I suppose the simple way without any extra tools, but we'd have to sort of, it's not very, if we wanted to sort of edit it, would be quite difficult, because what we could do is we could use Shift and then D to duplicate this. What we really could do, if we wanted to, is then rotate this using that, like Z. We could sort of put this in that place, we could copy it again, but that's a lot of effort, right? And also, if we wanted to move them all, it would be a bit of a hassle. So there is a modifier we can use. Now then, if we go back over here, so actually let's rename this to fins. Let's rename this to rocket, just to make it a little bit better. So if we add this modifier here, so we go to add modifier and mirror. Now, first of all, this looks a bit crazy. Don't worry, we'll fix it in a second. This lets us choose which axes of symmetry to basically copy this object in. And so we want X and Y, but instead of mirroring itself, we want it to mirror this object here. So you can see, hang on. So, okay, so it's a mirror object. So this basically, instead of mirroring around it, so this little yellow point here, this is the object's center of geometry. So currently by default, it'll mirror itself around that center of geometry. But by clicking this, we can mirror it around a different object center of geometry. So now it's mirroring around this little yellow dot. But we're mirroring on the X and Y axis. So we're mirroring around the red axis fine, but the Y axis, we've sort of, you can see it's along this line. So what we can do, if we grab this, now you can see where our missing fins are, because you can see how it sort of works now. If we rotate it, so Z, and then we want it to be a sort of 45-degree angle. And then this is a very rough way of doing it. There's tons of ways of doing it, but I think this is a nice, easy way to do it. And whoops, accidentally right-clicks there, which undoes your action. Something like that. How does this look? I think that's better. So now what we can do, if we wanted to change this, like, okay, I want this to be slightly up. You see how all of the fins now respond in the same way? Or if you wanted to scale them, all the fins respond in the same way. So this is a much more flexible way of adding detail. So it's just much quicker to edit in the long run. And also we want this to be smooth, of course. And let's give them a little more detail. So we can hide this for now. This just shows you the details of the modifier. we can add another one. So let's add another subsurface modifier, and we can add a few more levels of detail. And here we go. We're starting to get a bit of a rocket shape now. And again, so like, okay, there's a little bit there. So what we can do is go back into our editing mode, and we can press 3. We can click this face here, and we can just grab it along slightly, or we can extrude out again, something like that. So even though it looks a bit rough in the sort of this mode here, when it starts being smoothed out, you can see it looks much nicer. So there we go. Now we have a nice solid connection here. So brilliant. Okay, we have our fins. We have our basic rocket shape. So what can we add now? Well, I think, well, every rocket obviously needs an engine for a start, so otherwise it can't go anywhere. So let's see if we can make a nice engine for our rocket. So let's go back to our main body, to edit mode. If we delete this point, we can make a nice flat plane. So if we get rid of this, you can see here now we've got you can see the hollow sort of mesh, but what we want to do is we want to add a flat base to this, which we then can sort of pull out into like the funnel shape that you get with the rocket engines. So if what we can either do is you can sort of either just sort of select and drag all these points like this, or a much sort of more powerful way of doing it is you press the Alt key and then left click. This selects all the items in a loop. So this selects all the items here, in this case vertices. You can also do the same with edges. And if we press F to make a face, you can see now we have a flat face at the bottom of this rocket. So let's now make our cone. So what we can do is, again, there's loads and loads of different ways of doing this. But I found a nice way is you can press the I key to inset your face. So create a duplicate of the face, and you can scale it around a bit. And something like, we want to quite a sort of small base, like how about that? I think that's good. Then we can extrude it. This just moves it down. And in fact, if we do in the X-ray view, this might be a bit easier, and also the projector view. And let's make that a tad bigger. There we go. And actually, yeah, this now we want to make this a bit smaller. But again, completely down to your own sort of preference. Let's make that go. Extrude it out again with E. And how big do we want this? I think maybe one more step. We have a nice big engine. We could even make it slightly sort of fluted at the end to give it a bit more of a stylized look. There we go. All right, cool. So that's the basic shape. Now, of course, we want to delete this middle face. There we go. And re-add our face here. There we go. Got a little bit of a rocket here. So there is a bit of, you can see there's a bit of sort of choppiness, weird sort of shading effects going on here. Well, hopefully we can remove this by, if we use the ring select again, on the outside, we can press Control R to make a ring cut. And you can see by adding more points near a slightly dodgy looking bit of shading, you can oftentimes just sort of basically remove that effect. And something like that. There we go. Maybe even one here. Will that work? There we go. I think that's pretty good. And in fact, another way of doing this, instead of just deleting this outright, if we inset this, maybe this one anyway, and then what we can do is we can sort of, if we grab this upwards maybe. Yeah, again, there's loads of ways of doing this. Let's see what this looks like. Probably like that first, and then extrude again. What does this look like? Then we have actually a bit of thickness here. Yeah, so it sort of looks a bit more convincing from the side. Okay. Now I've got this effect again, so we can go back to, oops, getting a bit tricky to see now. We can select sort of, there we go, select this face here, it's a bit tricky to see. And then we add I again to inset. We can do this just a few times. There we go. Now the choppy detail has been removed, and that's pretty unnoticeable there. All right, cool. So now we have an engine, and right, what else do we need? Well, we need windows to see our top in a rocket. Else you don't know where you're going, of course. So let's see if we can add them. And we can do this in the similar process we added to the fins. So we can make a separate object, and then we can just sort of put it on the rocket. Because what you could do is you could sort of make a circle here and you could sort of extrude out, but that would be a very fiddly process, and it's sort of quite hard to customize it all at the end. So I like doing it in this way. Sort of may seem a little bit more basic, but honestly, it's just much nicer to work with, in my opinion. So okay, how to make a window? Well, I think let's go for a nice round window. Let's add another circle. Where's my circle gone? Has it gone here? No. There's my circle. Right. If we decrease the number of vertices again, don't need too much detail. I think 16 should be fine. And I think that should be good. So we can move it along, just so we can see it. And we want to rotate it. So we're going to sort of be putting it on the side here. And I think maybe make it a bit smaller. So okay. I think that's good. Okay. Add a face with F again. And similar process, we click on one side here. One side. We can extrude it with E. There we go. So now we've got like the sort of like the like the porthole on the ship, like a big sailor, like a big metal ship, container ship. It's going for sort of something like that, sort of very retro looking. So this can be like the sort of the metallic rim of it, if you like. The size, that's good size. I think we always change it later, compare it. Then what we want to do is, again, using the same tools we've already learned, we can press I to inset. And this can be now like a little sort of exaggerated little glass sort of window in it as well. So I think something like that's good. And we can, again, use our plane views as well. Our projected views to make our lives a bit easier to see where this is going. We can extrude with E. So inset sort of creates a new face from a ring and makes it on the same plane. Extrude lets you move it outwards. So that's the difference between those tools. So we're sort of pulling it out, but inset is like just sort of drawing like a line on it and sort of going, okay, this is a new face. So something like that. And we could do the same again. Extrude, and now we can scale it. So now we get a bit of an effect here. And in fact, we should probably scale this one too. So we can make it look sort of round. Don't want to move it too much at once. There we go. So again, it's the same tool doing it. It's sort of you can achieve loads of really cool stuff just by using this sort of basic set of tools. You really don't need to get too fancy. There we go. Something like that. How does it look from the front? I think that's not so bad. Don't need too, maybe one more. Yeah, one more. I think that's, yeah, make sure it still looks. There we go. Okay, brilliant. And again, when we go into shade smooth, okay, you can't really see it here, but it's always just to be safe. If you have a sort of a circle like this, just add an extra inset face, just so you don't get that sort of weird shading effect we saw earlier. All right, cool. So now we have a little porthole. We shade it smooth, and again, do the same process. We add some detail with subdivision subsurface. Can add a few more levels, and okay, I think it's not bad. Okay, you can see it's sort of slightly flat at the front. So maybe again, this is where it's sort of a bit of slightly trial and error. So we can sort of pull this forwards a little bit, tiny bit, then maybe inset it once more. There we go. And I think the rim of this, it's a little bit, it's not very noticeable. It's sort of, because that's sometimes with the sort of this subdivision subsurface, it tends to sort of smooth it out by removing the sort of definition of your edges, if you know what I mean. So if we increase this, you see how it sort of takes big chunks out of our edges, and it makes them a lot thinner. So what we can do, it's the same sort of thing. If you want to have more control over how it looks, just add more detail. So, and by that I mean like ring cuts. So for here, you can select this ring, Control R, and we can add a ring here. And you can see already, it's sort of the difference here. Like it's you can see the sort of the ghost of our original shape. You can see how much it's lost. It's sort of cuts here and smoothing it. If we add an extra ring here, all that detail. And in fact, if we do this ring, but we use the mouse wheel to scroll up or scroll down, we can add or remove rings. If we add 2, there we go. You can see now that we've got a lot of this detail back. And we can do the same thing here. It's sort of the glass is sort of intruding on this bit here. If we select this ring here, we can add a ring there. How does this look? There we go, much sharper transition now. I think that's good. And in fact, you could sort of probably pull this out a bit more, but I think that's good. All right, let's add this window. So again, I think it always helps me in the sort of these plane views. See, and in fact, to get it exactly on the z-axis, we can go into the properties of this item here, and you see on the y-axis it's sort of minus 4 meters long. We can just set that to 0, and there we go. It snaps perfectly back to the middle. Now we want it to obviously move out so you can see it. So go like that. Now if we move it, I think that's about good. There we go. Now we can just sort of end up lining up. So again, we go into the side view to make our lives a bit easier. And we want to rotate it like this. Don't worry that it's sort of clipping in slightly, because A, it's really not that noticeable. And if you sort of line it up right, then there'll be hardly any of it anyway. So something like that. Let's check the edges. Okay, yeah, see the edge doesn't look quite as good there, so we need to just put it in a little bit more. There we go. Or even actually you can make the window slightly smaller. Yeah, it's a little bit big. Then move it out, maybe that. Yeah, something like that. Cool. Let's add another window. I think it looks a bit lonely on its own, so let's add a second one. So we can click our window. In fact, let's rename it window. You can press Shift D to duplicate it. And again, if you right click, it sort of doesn't move the position of the original one. And if we press G for grab and move it up a bit, where should we do it? I think make it even actually smaller as well. Yeah, bit of always. It's quite nice to have sort of different shapes and sizes of things, just to give it a sort of slightly visually bit more interesting. So we can move it in. We can rotate. Oh, and this is the thing where sort of if you're in a plane view, when you rotate, you know it's only going to be rotating in that plane. So, and or same with grabbing as well. So it's just a bit easier to line up. There we go. How does that look? A bit more. Like that. There we go. Not so bad. Right, we're nearly done with our rocket shape, actually. I think the only thing that's missing is a nose cone, because you can see the top, it doesn't look, yeah, it's a bit sort of getting that slight weird geometry effect as well. But also, if we want to sort of make it a different color, and that's the thing, if you want to sort of have a really big, like, extra fin going down here, or sort of a second row, absolutely go for it. This is just my own sort of interpretation of it, but please do sort of try whatever you want to and see all the cool different designs you can come up with. But in this one, I think let's add a nose cone. So we can go back to our rocket shape, and right, first of all, how big do we want it to be? I think if we sort of make it, this is where we can sort of line up the geometry we already have. So I think about that would be good. So if we can, again, we can either go into our X-ray mode, or we can use the ring select with Alt left click, and then we can shift to add points to our selection. So yeah, we can do shift and drag our little box to add it here. I think that's a good size. So we can do shift just as well as we can do shift D on individual objects. We can do shift D to duplicate a set of points within an object. So do shift D. You see how we've got a little copy here of that section. Well, if we right click, it resets its position, but currently it still thinks it's part of the original object. So if we were to click off, this is now bad because we have now created a copy of this but attached to the same object. So if we try and grab this, you see how it's all slightly messed up now. So instead of that, what you want to do before you click off, so yeah, like that, you want to press P, and P separates it into a different object. So we do separate by selection, so it's separating it into different objects based on what we have clicked. And now you see this is a separate thing entirely. So we can call this a nose cone. And this is a really good way of sort of, because now it's the exact same shape as the underlying rocket. Except what we can do now is, first of all, I think, again, it looks a bit weird at the top, but we can fix that by adding some rings. It's a cone. Cones work slightly weirdly. Okay, what we can do is we can extrude it downwards. And then bigger. This is a bit of a hack, but yeah, because it sort of doesn't classify this as a ring. So you can't make a ring cut here because it thinks the face is a bit strange. But what we can do instead is sort of get around that by adding some detail below and then shrinking it like this. There we go. Down a bit. Scale it. There we go. So don't clip into it. And now what we can do is we can add some modifiers to this. So we've already got, it inherits the subsurface modifier from the object originally it was on, so we can add a bit more if we want. But we can introduce a new modifier. We can add a thickness modifier, which I think we covered last time. But to give a brief recap, sorry, a solidify modifier. This just sort of, if we move this up temporarily, see how it's sort of like a flat, like paper-like here. If we add a thickness modifier, sorry, solidify modifier, I always get the name wrong. It just sort of, well, it does what it does. It solidifies it into a sort of an actual sort of 3D shape rather than just a sort of flat 2D one. So we can, all right, let's Control Z to undo your actions. There we go, move it back there. And now we can change our thickness. So change how thick it is here. And we can, if we go into X-ray mode, it's sort of a bit easier to see what's going on. It's got this thing called offset, which sort of shows you where the sort of thickness is from. So an offset of 1 means it's getting thicker from the outside, -1 from the inside, and then in the middle, a bit of a mix. So I think, maybe make it something like, make it a bit thicker, just to sort of emphasize the nose cone, if you know what I mean. Just to make it sort of visually stand out slightly. And again, we're getting this sort of slightly weird. We get sort of this. You see these sort of slightly pointy edges. We can fix this by changing the in which these modifiers act. So they can be dragged around, and you can see first. So first of all, it's performing the subdivision. So it's cutting up all the faces into smaller ones, and then it's adding thickness. But this causes this sort of problem here. So what instead we can make it thicker, and then subdivide it. You can see it looks a lot smoother now. It looks a lot nicer. So that's sort of something to sort of just be aware of what order your modifiers are happening in. Okay, right. I think that as a basic shape, we're pretty much done here. Oh yeah, don't forget to save your model. Don't want to lose your hard work. So now, I think we can get on some materials. How long time? Got 20 minutes. I think we can get on some materials actually. So hopefully this is a good refresher of the stuff you've learned already, and how you can sort of combine them in different ways to make a slightly more complicated object. But yes, let's add some cool materials. So currently at the top here, you can see there are different view modes. So the first one is like this sort of weird wireframe which shows all the edges. And we have this one, which is sort of just a bit grey. And now we have these materials views, which show how our object will look when we actually make the final render. And it's sort of a bit of a boring, like plasticky white color, which is sort of the default no material color. But let's change that. So we click on our rocket. Let's change this first. On the same set of tabs where we found our materials tab, or sorry, our modifiers tab, this little spanner, we can go down here to this sort of red, like sort of weird sphere thing with like little checkerboard on it. This is the material tab, and you can see here we currently have no materials, but what we can do, and you know, so wherever you see that sort of little checkerboard sphere, that means it's something to do with materials. We can add a new one. So if we click new, this then opens up all of this, and it looks quite sort of intimidating. But this is how you change the material of the object, and we'll go through it. And let's start with sort of the nice one. So first of all, base color. You can see it's white. This is sort of a white color. And if we click this, we can change it. So let's make it sort of nice. You can see how it changes. And there we go. This is immediately looking a lot more fun. So let's make it like a purple. I think I'll do purple my example. Should we go blue? You know what? Let's go for blue. Something like that. And if it's not showing up, make sure that you are in the correct viewing mode. So in the top here, that you've clicked this one here. If you're in the original, I think it's called modeling, viewport shading, here we go. You won't see any of these materials. It doesn't render it doesn't show you the materials you have to sort of save on computer sort of processing time. So make sure you're clicked on the correct one so you can actually see it. Else you might be sort of, ooh, and that's the sort of final. Whoops. There we go. I thought my computer for a second. That was not good. Yes, so you have to be in this mode to see your materials show up. Okay. We can also change some other properties. So there's something called here, metallic. A lot of these are pretty self-descriptive, actually. So metallic changes how metallic it looks. So it looks like a metal. And it's one of the things where if you change, we'll get onto this later. This is a sort of the final rendering mode. This view is sort of like a simulation of it. So it looks a bit different. And there's a difference we'll get onto. But you can see here, it looks a lot more sort of shiny now. So you can make it metallic if you want. I think I like to sort of have it a nice matte color though. Roughness is how rough it is, so change it really reflective now. Yeah, it's sort of like really plasticky. or you can make it sort of completely non-reflective, completely matte. Let's go for something in the middle. So I add this. A bit too shiny, maybe. And again, this is a completely way you can go. Completely up to your creative. Let's see what designs you can all come up with. Okay, and those are all the sort of the basic ones here. And right, let's color some other bits. So nose cone. Let's add this. Give this a color. And so in the same process, sorry. So you click onto this, and you click new material. Whoops. Click onto this. You click new material. If we want to reuse, sort of see it from this little menu here, so we can reuse our blue one, or we can do a new one. What color should we do this? What doesn't look horrible? Could do red. Hello. Yeah, maybe like a yellow one, something like that. That's quite nice. And for the fins, and I think I want the fins to be the same color as the cone. Get a bit of, sort of theme going on. So again, we can click new, and then having this selected, we can click our yellow color. And you can actually rename these. So let's rename this to make it a bit more sensible. So call this yellow, call this blue. And the benefit of doing it like this is this material is the exact same as this one here, which means if we change it for the fins, it'll change for the cone as well, because it's using the same copy of the material. If we wanted to give it like the yellow and then make it separate, we can click this little button here. Sorry, this one here to make it. So now it's got the same properties, but now if we change it, you can see how the nose cone doesn't change. And this makes like a copy of it, but a separate one. But for now, I think we'll keep it like, again, Control Z to undo like that. Cool, right. How do we make our, so we've got our basic colors. We want to make our engine metallic, right? But the problem is if we go, okay, we want to make it a nice metal, it's changing the entire rocket, this entire mesh here, because we added the engine to the same mesh. And so what we could have done is we could have made the engine separate and stuck it on like it did with the fins and the nose cone. But there's another way if we can get around this problem by assigning different patches of the mesh to different materials. So let's make this dark blue again. And okay, first of all, let us add another material. So you can just add another material here by clicking this little plus button, and this adds a blank slot. Then click new, and then it's added an extra material. So this object now has two materials, but this one isn't assigned to anything. So let's call this metal. Okay, what do we do now? So if we come to our engine here, and we get into the face view, it's quite easy here. If we click on face, you see how we can select these different materials. There's a button here called assign. This will basically tell Blender, I want this particular face to be this material. So by default, everything is assigned to this blue material. But if we click on this face here and we have our metal color selected, we'll change it in a minute. We click assign, you can see that it's this different material. And if we change it here, so say red, red, it's now changing this patch because it's been assigned to this metal material. It's now changing this patch independently from the rest of the rocket, and this is fantastic for us because this means, first of all, okay, let's make this a bit more sensible for now. We can simply select all of the faces corresponding to our engine and assign them to this new material. So if we use our Alt and left click to sort of use the ring selection, it works on faces too. We can sort of pick up. Actually, an easier way I might do it is go into X-ray mode again, and we can sort of just do the box select, and we can just make sure we just hit all the faces and nothing else. All right, brilliant. There we go. Got it first try. And we can hit assign after selecting it, having the metal selected, and here we go. There we go. It's now properly shaded all these areas with our color. And in fact, let's now make it metallic. Let's give it a sort of, I find with metals, you don't want to go fully metallic, but critically, you want to decrease the roughness. There we go. Now it looks nice and shiny. That's a really cool metal color now. Should do a nice brass color. I think that looks quite cool. Okay, and we can do the same thing to the windows. So for the windows, we can do new, and then we can click this and then assign it to the metal. Same for this one, new metal. And unless you sort of don't want your astronauts to be able to see out of your rocket, I think we should have some clear glass here so they can have a look out. So we can do the same thing. So we can click and select all of the, sometimes a little bit tricky, there we go. Select all of the faces corresponding to the sort of the glass dome here. And if you hold Shift, you can add new points to your selection. You press Alt as well for the ring select. You can do something like this. And then, okay, of course, I immediately mess it up. All right, let's just do it the sort of the simple way. Let's see if I can get it. Bit of a sort of a dexterity challenge with your mouse. Oh, okay, I failed again. Right. Let's just do that bit there. Add a new material. So, whoops, yep, new material slot. Add new materials, call this one glass. And just for now, have it as a placeholder and then a sign. There we go. Then we could just really not doing too well. Sort of, okay, what else we can do is as an addition to the box select, if you press C, this has a little paintbrush. And so we can sort of paint all of the faces. And if you're really bad at using the box select like me, it could be a sort of bit easier. I can just sort of do it in little goes. This is by far not the neatest way of doing it, but can't quite click on it all properly today, apparently. Oh, just did it again as well. I'm prophesizing my own doom. All right, this is getting ridiculous. All right, we also just did the sort of the really simple way there. Maybe just click everything. And using this assigning materials method is a really nice way of having a single mesh, because whilst the way we did our fins was really sort of nice and sort of stuck it in, you won't want to have them as separate objects all the time. So being able to just pick faces and assign them to different materials is a really nice way of just sort of, well, adding extra material, but having the same mesh. So do we get everything? I think we got everything. Okay, right, let's just do it. And in fact, you know what? A better way of doing it, get rid of this window so we can right click it, click delete. If we copy this one now, it'll keep all of the information. So it's kept the information of which faces are which. And not only does that save me having to click on them and fail again, it means that we just have to, we can get all our faces pre-colored in. So you can sort of make one object of the type you want and then just copy it over, and it copies over everything. So the mesh, the materials, it's just a really good way of doing it. Let's make it a bit smaller and let's grab. Yeah, so once you get used to using all the hotkeys, you can really sort of edit stuff really quickly. There we go. I think that's not so bad. Again, save the project. And let's make this actually look like glass, or the best we can do. So if we change the something called transmission here, this is basically how much light is transmitted, how much goes through it. So if we increase the transmission, now this is okay. So this is in this particular preview mode, it doesn't render glassy objects that well. You can sort of see it if you scroll around a bit. It's just one of the ways. So when we get to the final render, it'll be much better. But you can see that it's obviously meant to be glassier. Okay, cool. All right, we've got 10 minutes. So right, last bit of materials. Let's add the cool checkerboard design. So how we can do this is we can do the same method we did for our picking faces and assigning them. So we can add some, again, using Control R for the ring cuts, and we can increase the number of rings. Something like, so I don't know if we have a workaround. So if we increase the, and this is the process you'll often go through, is you'll try and do something, go, doesn't quite work, and you'll sort of revisit what you've already made and see how you can sort of apply it. So what I want to do is I want to increase the detail of this mesh and then add the little checkerboards. So if we go back to our original rocket, we can actually apply this subdivision subsurface so we get the extra faces to work with. So I think a level of 2 will be enough. And what we can do is we have to be in object mode for this. This little downward arrow and click apply. Okay, that's too much detail now. All right, let's see it with 1. What does it look like? Trial and error, trial and error. Okay, that's a bit better. So what we can do now is add our ring, I think. There we go, that's not bad. And down, where should we say? Here, yeah. Add a ring here. And go into the face mode by pressing 3, or I forgot to mention you can actually change the modes here by just clicking up here. Go into our face select, and we can do the same thing. So we select every alternating face. There we go. I think the checkable panel is quite cool. There we go. And we can go to the materials, and we can add a new material, new to material slot, sorry, add a new material, and then hit assign with everything selected. There we go. And we can change the color, maybe. Okay, not green. I think keep it as white now, or maybe red. I don't know. Hopefully you can make a slightly nicer looking rocket than mine. But there we go, and we can just repeat the process down here as well. Right. Making sure not to accidentally click any of the wrong squares. Lots of clicking today. There we go. Sign. There we go. And we can call this, I don't know, white. Cool. Right. There we go. And we have our fully colored rocket and materials. So we've just to recap what we've done. We've learned how to use the knowledge from previous with our pencils to make a slightly more complicated shape. We've learned about the mirror modifier. So we can copy our fins, and it'll track it. So if we move this, it will properly update all the mirroring. We've learned how to make materials and to change them, and about the basic properties of materials like metallic and other things like that. And okay, right, in the last few minutes, I think as we've managed to be ahead of schedule here, if we talk a little bit about lighting, I think that'll be quite cool. So if you notice this final mode here, this is the sort of shading mode, and this is the final super duper render with proper lighting. So in this previous one, it sort of have this sort of ambient global light, and it sort of doesn't quite, it has a sort of good go at estimating what your final material will look like. But this one is the actual proper final render. So when we'll get onto rendering soon, when you hit the render key, this is the mode it'll do it in. And you can see here that it looks a bit weird. Why? Okay. So when the scene starts off, you get a little light here, this little thing, and you can see it's projecting onto the rocket. But of course, this is the only light in the scene, so it looks a bit strange. So with lights, we can move them in the exact same way as rockets. As a rocket, well, yes, exactly the same as rockets, as objects. So we can grab it, and you can see here, this is where it updates. You can see it moving around, and we can move it all sorts of ways. But let's, for now, we move it up. We'll sort of cast a light on it from above, something like that. But now you can see it's really dim because we moved it far away. But we can go into the properties, here we go, of the light, see the power in watts. If we increase this power, and we can either just type it in, let's type it in, or drag a little slider, we can see here that our rocket is getting a bit brighter because the light, more of the light is reaching the rocket, right? Like that, maybe. And what we can do, looks a bit sort of bit ominous, maybe. And lighting is one of the sort of really cool things you can do in Blender. It sort of takes a while to really get hold of it, but you can do some really fun stuff. And then we can change the color of the light even, so make it sort of a spooky red light or sort of an alien green light, and do anything like that as well. Let's for now. And actually, we can also increase the radius of our light to make it a sort of slightly softer look. Here we go. And we can duplicate it in the same way, but first of all, let's move it over. We can duplicate it with Shift D. We can move it around. There we go. We sort of just begin to light up our rocket in a slightly more interesting way. And we can really sort of see how our material, our glass, it's doing a slightly better job of it now. Let's move that there, maybe. Again, using the different projected modes, quite easy here. There we go. Something like that. Maybe one at the front as well. Like that. This is, of course, not at all the best way of doing the lighting, but just to sort of give you a taste of what you can do in Blender here. So, okay, I think that's not so bad. You can really see the sort of metallic shine now. Right. I think as well, as we have a bit more time, we can talk briefly about the different rendering engines. So in Blender, there are two main rendering engines. We have what we're currently using, which is the sort of one that it starts off on, is called Eevee. And Eevee is used for things like computer games. And it's basically a really quick, it still looks amazing, you can make fantastic stuff on it, but it's sort of a quick initial go. It's not as thorough as the other mode, but it's a lot faster to do. So you can see that we're moving our camera around, and this isn't having to update at all. It just is there. Now we can swap between our rendering engines. If we go to the side panel here, see this like little, I think it's meant to be a little camera. Correct me if I'm wrong though. But we can change this. We can click on this way where it says render engine. Workbench. Not quite sure what that is. No, I don't think it's really used that much. We can change to cycles, which is the other one. And now you can see, yeah, you move it around and it looks really weird. It's sort of looking a bit sort of slightly staticky. But cycles is the sort of the ultra high def, really precision. It's really good at doing lighting and as well glass as well. So if we go back to our, and so this is why we couldn't really, we could sort of see it's a bit glassy in Eevee. But Eevee doesn't really do glass that well. But if we go to cycles, we can now see, yeah, that we can sort of see it reflecting off everything. So in fact, if we change our material now, glass material, if we make it a bit rougher, make it look sort of slightly cloudy. Yeah, something like that. Oh, let me check something. Sometimes it does this. Okay, so this is a slight interlude. Let's first of all check. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so every face in Blender has an orientation. So if you imagine a cube, so the faces, if you're looking at the cube, sort of the faces are projected out. But if you're on the inside of the cube looking sort of towards the different things, that's the sort of the reverse of the face. And sometimes if you make this, when I did this sort of in practice, the faces were sort of flipped the wrong way. And the way you can check this, and it made some really weird reflections and lighting. So the way, if you, just a brief to, if you want to check this, if you go up here to the top left, you can see this little arrow here, and this is the viewport overlays. If you go down to the bottom, you click this one called face orientation. This shows you which way the faces are pointing. Blue is good, basically. Blue is outward, which is the one that Blender properly wants to render, because it saves time by not having to really render the opposite face. If it's red, it means your faces are inverted. So the way it looked, just to demonstrate, it looked before like, oh, okay, of course I now cannot get it to work. Maybe it's because I've already got it correct. It won't let me undo it. Get it to break. No. Okay. If it was dodgy, it would look red here. And the way to fix that, you press everything and you press Shift N to recalculate the normals, and it'll go, oh, wait, hang on. And the normal is the sort of the which way the face is pointing. It'll go, okay, my face is inside out. But thankfully that didn't happen here. So if your reflections look a bit weird, that might be a reason why. But okay, we can turn this overlay off. And yeah, I think that's a good point to finish for today. I think that's quite a lot to take in with making, sort of getting used to the controls again, getting some more complicated shape making, and then just basically playing around with materials. They're honestly part of the most fun things you do. And we can do loads of crazy stuff. So if we go back to this mode, we can make this a metallic blue if we want to. There's, you know, the sky's the limit. And even with a sort of really basic suite of tools, we can already do some really cool stuff. Yeah, we go nice and sort of metal, or you can again make it really shiny. Again, I'll stop playing around with it, otherwise I'll be here all day. It's too much. It's too fun just playing around the materials, see how they react. And then at the end, we managed to look at some basic lighting as well, and the different modes here. So actually, if we turn it back to Eevee, just so it doesn't hurt as much to look at, there we go, much nicer. There we go. Right, I think I will end the recording here.